Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the 16-Bit Thief podcast. Like always, I'm your host, Jake Melvin. No name is more synonymous with the history of video games than Atari. From the landmark title Pong to the delightfully weird and difficult Marble Madness to bowling alley staple Area 51, their history is iconic and undisputed. But just as much as Atari was known for their released games, they had gained a reputation for their prototypes as well. Marble Madness 2 was highly sought after, and Primal Rage 2 eluded the public eye for over 2 decades. Atari Games no longer exists, unfortunately, but their legacy lives on, and many dedicated arcade collectors look for their titles wherever they can. Atari's developers are also pretty scattered around the country, some of them being very hard to find, and I got lucky to get in contact with Stephen Riesenberger. Mr. Riesenberger was the lead designer of both Primal Rage games, as well as the associate producer of San Francisco Rush 2049, one of the best racing games to ever grace the industry. He also served as lead designer on Boom Blocks and designer on Dark Watch and the Godfather game. His resume is equally impressive, boasting credits at DICE Los Angeles, Midway Games, and Visceral Games. I can't really contain my excitement for this one. I've been wanting to do this one for years. I've wanted to know about the history of Atari's games for over a decade now, probably longer, and many of my questions have finally been answered. So, let's move on to the interview, shall we? Question number 1. Your portfolio says that you wanted to be a game designer since Christmas of 1979. What led you to join Atari in 1993? He was tired of college and wanted practical experience in the industry he wanted to work. He filled out an application at Atari Games, went in for an interview, and was hired as a video lab assistant in the stop-motion capture studio. Question number 2, and this is a 2-point question. Japanese gaming legends SNK were the distributors of Atari games in Japan, as well as Gaoko's Radical Bikers, which Atari also published. How exactly did SNK become the publishers of your titles over there? And was there a sizable fan base of Atari's titles in Japan? He states that he ultimately doesn't know, but it might be similar to how Capcom was the publisher for High Moon Studios' Dark Watch. Japanese publishers also have marketing and distribution channels that some American companies do not have. As for Atari's popularity in Japan, he's unsure, but he does know that there was some pushback from Japanese marketing and distribution over Primal Rage. Question number 3. Freeze was an unreleased puzzle game that used Atari's Kojak hardware. Despite the intuitive gameplay and neat spin on the genre, it ultimately never saw the light of day. Do you know what led to the cancellation of it? He has no idea and was just a fan of the game and provided playtesting and feedback during its production. Question number 4. Though Freeze was said to be developed by Atari, the game has Japanese text as well as Japanese voices, unlike other Atari titles. Was there an external developer who worked on it and was uncredited, i.e. the Japanese branch of Time Warner Interactive? He's fairly certain that all development of Freeze was done in-house. He thinks that from the variety of Japanese puzzle matching games that were done in the lab, the goal of Freeze was done to appeal to that audience. Question number 5. San Francisco Rush 2049 is a unique specimen, as San Francisco Rush is not the same as San Francisco, California. What was it like remaking the city for the game to be more fun, quote-unquote? The main complaint from marketing about the original Rush was that it wasn't casual enough. The development team struggled to accommodate their feedback while at the same time staying true to the white-knuckle wheel-to-wheel racing that the franchise was known for. Going futuristic allowed both art and design to stretch reality in the name of fun. Corkscrews and ramps were integrated into the architecture, and even the texturing of futuristic buildings was done to mesh the fast pace of the game. Question number 6. San Francisco Rush came out around the same time when many racers were more grounded in reality. What exactly led to the creation of the Rush games? His recollection is that Rush was founded on the legacy of the driving realism that the hard drive-in games introduced. Though Rush's cabinet did not feature the chain-driven force feedback system, everything about the Rush franchise was built on the hard drive-in foundation. He took issue with my claim that other racers were grounded in reality, when games like Daytona, Ridge Racer, and Cruisin' were far more unrealistic than the Rush games, even 2049. Again, it was the solid foundation of the realistic driving model, though numerous training wheels had to be bolted onto the system, that drew racing enthusiasts to their games. Question number 7. Hot Rod Rebels, the planned 2049 sequel, was unfortunately never released. Were there ever plans to move game development to home ports? He says that there was, and around the time of Hot Rod Rebels' cancellation, the whole coin-op product development team started to transition to console development. Unfortunately, it never came to pass. Question number 8. Primal Rage 2 used a PlayStation 1-based CPU instead of the GT system used in the first game, which is also notoriously difficult to emulate. What necessitated the change? He believes that the change in hardware came from trying to accommodate the fighting graphics from being streamed off the hard drive while the moves were being displayed. He thought that the feat of engineering was astounding at the time, but only enabled one character to have access to the move and animations of 2, both the human and beast forms. Question number 9. Primal Rage 2 ditched the complicated specials and combo system of the first game and went for a more traditional approach. I felt a Darkstalkers vibes with the changes. What were the influences behind the new battle system? The development team actually thought it was the other way around. Primal Rage attempted to simplify the button-mashing-prone layout of the popular Street Fighter franchise and the move button-style execution to be more inclusive to inputs. Primal Rage had a more native edge playstyle in which a button was either pressed or released, or a button level, in which a button is simply held down in combination with a joystick move to execute specials. Ultimately, the development team gave in to the popular control scheme. Question number 10. I need to know some information about this one since there's nothing on it at all online, but do you know what Die Alien Scum was about? I do know that it ran on the same hardware as Beavis and Butthead. He remembers that the game was a third-person 3D shooter similar to Zaxxon, but with full analog 2-axis freedom. Question number 11. War of the Final Assault was an awesome game because it was one of the few arcade-exclusive first-person shooters, as well as having an awesome multiplayer mode. Despite this, it never saw a home port. Rumors do persist that there was a planned N64 port, but nothing else on that has surfaced. Do you know why War never got a home port? He has no idea, but states that the game might not have gotten a home port because it was too mature for a Nintendo console. Question number 12. As a follow-up to my previous question, War was one of the few first-released arcade-exclusive first-person shooters. Do you know where the idea came about to make the game for arcades instead of PCs or consoles at the time? His guess is that PC console markets were saturated by big franchises, and Atari Games' strength was arcade development and distribution. Ergo, it remained arcade-exclusive. Question number 13. Of the cancelled Atari games that you had worked on, which do you wish had made it to production? He says that the tracks and stunts in Hot Rod Rebels were some of the most over-the-top and difficult and fun stunts and shortcuts ever designed. The idea that the optimal line through 3 laps in a race changed each lap as new shortcuts and stunts opened up was groundbreaking. Be sure to check his blog out for more detail on the game and track design. We totally did the jump before the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'll link that in the description for you guys to check out. Question number 14. What is your personal favorite title that you have ever worked on? Hands down, Boom Block's Bash Party. He thinks it was because him and his team got to come up with dozens of new game modes, blocks, and tools and created thousands of levels in under a year. Over 400 levels shipped in the box game, and there were another 100 available on launch day for download, but there were literally thousands of levels and lots of ideas that just didn't meet the quality bar and make it into the game. For example, there was a full stack of levels stood up to explore a maze-like game mode using the grabbing hand where you guided a block through a maze under glass. The concept totally worked with the tools they had shipped in the final game, but there were some more quirks, like if you released the block, you wouldn't be able to grab it again since it was under glass. Another reason that he believes the design team delivered and went above and beyond their stated goals from the beginning of the project was because they kept 30% of the game the same as the original. Dismantle and knockdown levels stayed the same, and even though he fought to keep the shooting gallery modes, they improved about 40% of the game. More levels and ideas used the existing tools, and more focus was on the multiplayer. In fact, they first imagined almost every level in game and mode as a multiplayer mode. If it was successful in multiplayer, it almost guaranteed to be successful in single player. Finally, they added about 30% new content to the game. New tools and block types gave way to the new multiplayer and single-player modes. The underwater dismantle and outer space zero-gravity gem blast levels were lots of fun to create. Lots more multiplayer and versus co-op modes and levels as well. He also even had a funny little anecdote about Steven Spielberg to share on the subject of playtesting. But another story for another time. And thus concludes another episode of the 16-Bit Thief podcast. Again, I want to thank Mr. Riesenberger for agreeing to do an interview. Who would have thought that Primal Rage's control scheme came from trying to simplify the other fighting games at the time? Never would have thought myself. Thanks for tuning into my show. Be sure to check out the next episode in which I interview
a new opponent
who worked on Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Vampire Savior, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Yeah, that's the big surprise. Until then, this is the 16-Bit Thief, signing off.